Hey folks, this is Loma02. It's been a long time since I've done a video, and actually I've been taking a break from Magic for a bit, but I'm getting back into it now. So actually I'm going to be doing something completely different than what I normally do. I've been doing Canadian Highlander for a while. I'm taking a bit of a break from that format, and kind of turning over new rocks, looking at new things in Magic to do with it. And one of the formats that I've always kind of enjoyed, but it's a fairly tough format, at least unless you're very invested in it and keep up to date with it. To get involved in is Penny Dreadful, which essentially is a rotating format that uses only 1 cent cards at the time of each set rotation in Magic. It may be standard set rotation, but I know it's at least set with the set rotations, because I know when the next one comes out, they rotate the prices. And it's based off, I believe, a Scryfall check. I forget which actual economy they use to determine the pricing of them. But basically, each card is a penny at the time that the ban list is set, and then the ban list is set for, basically 3 months or so, and only penny legal cards are legal. And obviously, prices fluctuate, and cards come on and off again from, being a penny and or not being a penny. Or WotC sometimes will print, not print, but, release new digital products that have old reprints in them, and the prices can go down significantly, and you get new cards that way. And you have new sets printed, obviously, that have some cards that are only a penny. That said, this format is based on Penny Dreadful legality, but it is singleton, much like Canadian Highlander, much like Commander, except without a Commander. And it's 100 card. So you're playing 100 card Penny Dreadful decks that are singleton in nature, unified. So each deck ostensibly should cost about $1. Sometimes they're a little bit over $1. Sometimes they can be under, depending on what bot you use, if they take partial credit for each penny in your full trade cycle, because some of them are worth less than a cent. Obviously, if you're buying any card independently, you're going to pay at least something a cent, probably, unless you can get them from a free bot, which some of these cards you can. So one of the first things I thought getting into this is that it'd be a fun brewing experience, because these are a lot of cards that, some of which have historical precedence and have been very good, historically in Magic. Some of which just don't quite make the mark in any of the formats that are out there. And I wanted to brew. The biggest thing I enjoy in Magic is getting to, explore, one, its history, and two, just the cards and building with them, right? And trying to get some sort of semblance of an effective strategy, given constraints, because I think that actually breeds a lot of creativity. Because when you just get to build with the best things all the time, in my opinion, the game gets kind of boring. If I can play 4 Tarmogoyfs, I get bored pretty easily. Now it depends on what my goal is in Magic too, right? But for me, it's a hobby, and it's fun. That's kind of why I picked this up. So, a couple administrative notes. If you are not familiar with Penny Dreadful and or this format, there are a couple of resources out there, because it is fairly difficult to figure out, hey, which cards actually cost a penny? Which cards can I build with? Scryfall is a pretty useful tool. This is literally all of the Penny Dreadful legal cards. I don't know how many there are. There's 11,141 cards that are available to build with in the format. You can actually do specific searches, and one of the things you can do for legality is check Penny Dreadful and then put in whatever criteria you need to find the cards you're looking for you can play with. It may be something as simple as just look at all the red cards, right? And then you just go to town, which is the first deck I have that you saw there on my back screen. So I think it's one of the first decks folks tend to go to when they get to a new format. You also have PennyDreadfulMagic.com, which actually will do a deck check, so you can upload your entire deck. I think right here I have a Storm deck. Yep, Storm is a viable deck. It's buildable in this format. As far as quality goes, probably a little less than some Storm decks, but it is still a Storm deck. So, yeah, these are some resources that are out there that are available. I'd also like to give a shout-out to the Pennylander Discord, which was set up by Necropotence here. And I will link the links to all of these below in the comments section, so that if this is a format that interests you, you can actually look it up, or use these resources that are out there and, jump into the Discord and get some games, get some deck-building advice, etc. So, Pennylander. Pennylander's pretty cool, because you get to kind of go through and check out some of the cards that, have just gotten forgotten over time, or just been printed so much they're really cheap, like Shock. There are some cards that are very playable even in Canadian Highlander, like Chain Lightning, like Burst Lightning, Brute Force. These are perfectly playable in Canadian Highlander, and Red Deck wins. And they're still legal here. That said, one of the things you get to do when you get into Pennylander is the most efficient and the highest of quality cards tend to be out of the price range. So the format itself is a little bit more mid-rangey. When you start looking at a deck like Red Deck Wins, which I think is one of the first things that players that are new to a format, and intelligently so, will go towards, because it's a very linear strategy that is fairly adept at doing its job. And it can be fairly hard to beat, right? Unless you're playing like White Weenie or some strategy specifically designed to beat it. But when you start going through and looking at the cards, you'll actually notice, the mana curve in this deck looks a little off. It's a lot more 2 heavy. And traditionally it would be, the most heavy in the one spot. And it would definitely lighten out in the 3 spot. Light out in the 3 spot. Probably raise in the 2 spot and then have almost no 4s, maybe only 1 4 and then no 5s. But you have to go a little more mid-rangey in this format. And also heavier on lands because you have less efficient cards. You need more lands. And you see in the blue decks, you definitely need more lands in your control decks because you have less effective cantrips. You have less, you don't have ponders and stuff like that in the format. So you just need to rely on variants of draw steps to a higher extent. So yeah, this is Pennylander red deck wins, or at least my build of it. As you can see, it goes significantly bigger, and it has more value-oriented cards like Flame Tongue Kavu here, which is not a card that you traditionally see in red deck wins, or like Arc Lightning, another good example of a value-oriented card. But you have Flame Tongue Kavu, Chandra Pyromancer. Randomly, there are some Planeswalkers legal. Hellrider, shockingly legal, also very playable in red deck wins in Canadian Highlander. Hero of Oxenridge, probably playable in some builds of red deck wins in Canadian Highlander, also just fine. Pian Kieran, Tectonic Giant, so some of these cards just really have never made it. Like some have made it, but they're just old now. Like Siege Gang Commander, it's a draft Rockstar. Really not that playable in most constructed formats because it's just too much mana. But when formats slow down, these cards tend to, be much more viable. And as I can attest to this build of the deck, it's very strong. You also have some really cool tools for utility, like Embrace Shield Breaker in this style of build. If Rimrock Knight is an additional pump spell. I think I'm running. Where are you at, buddy? Some really cool ones like Crater Makers in this deck, which is also very playable in Canadian Highlander, but it's just a good utility card as well. You see cards like Arc Lightning, like I was talking about, and then where are you at? Like Stagger Shock, which is one that hasn't been seen a lot of play recently, but is a very powerful card, especially if the format's slower and more mid-rangey. You could knock out 2 mana dorks with this. You could knock out a couple threats. Quite good. Chandra's Phoenix, again, very slow for 3 mana, but it's a value card. It gets killed. It comes back fairly easily in a red-style deck. Countryside Crusher, Slagstorm, because you're a little slower, some decks may have more 1-drops. I'll tell you right now, hint, hint, White Weenie does have a lot more 1-drops available to it that are playable. So sometimes you have to actually operate as a control deck when you're playing a red deck. And this card allows you to do that. It's also just randomly a 3-damage burn spell as well to the face, which is fine. It's not great, but it's fine. It's like Flames of the Firebrand, which again is another card that can be used in like the creature mirrors, the small creature mirrors. Yeah, but at the end of the day, you'll see there's a lot less quality in like the 2-drop creatures. You're playing stuff like War Driver, like Stigma Lasher's kind of techy, but it's a playable 2-drop in the format. But you're a little bit slower than like the builds that you'll see in Canadian Highlander, or even like obviously like Modern Burn's gonna be a ton faster because it's basically all 1-drops and a couple 2-drops. But yeah, that's kind of how this ends up looking. At the same time, like you look through this and like I would say at least like for this deck specifically, at least 60% of the cards are Canadian Highlander playable. And the rest would be playable under different conditions in the format if like you didn't have decks that could turn 4, turn 3, I mean even turn 1 still with the Storm, but you have to get very lucky, but they're a consistent turn 4 deck. If you're only playing mid-range aggressive matchups or slower combo, slower control matchups, like a deck like this is perfectly fine. But I kind of want to showcase it because I do think this deck is a perfectly reasonable deck. I would think when I first approached the format, I had this I think misconception that the decks would be kind of lower quality, and frankly, they actually function. Like the decks actually function quite well. You get to play a very good game of Magic. Actually, sometimes better than Canadian Highlander because the games are less snowbally. There's a lot more decisions to be made in them. Advantage is a lot more incremental, generally speaking, in most of the matchups, which is one of the things that actually interests me about it, because you just get more, in my opinion, like good gameplay experience. Not that you don't in Canadian Highlander, like vintage and more eternal style play, but I think you tend to get a little bit less of that because sometimes it's very snowbally, right? Like if you just don't have the Force of Will, you're just dead, right? In some matchups, and that kind of play style is fine. It definitely makes your mulligan decisions more important, but it can also be a little exhausting too, because you're just like, well, they just had it, so there is that. Now, we talked about red deck wins. I think the place to be, generally speaking, in this format is mid-range, right? Because the card quality is a little bit lower, generally speaking. It's a little less efficient. So I think you want to squeeze as much value as you can out of your cards. This is actually the first deck I made in this format as rock mid-range, because I kind of figured folks would be on like White Weenie decks and red deck win style decks. And I thought this format, generally speaking, would have lower viability for combo, which I kind of disproved a little bit later on. I personally disproved to myself later on with some of the builds I'll kind of showcase here. But this is rock mid-range. This is a basically Rexer deck minus the survival of the fittest, which is not a legal card, unfortunately. But Recurring Nightmare is. Shockingly enough, this is a penny on Moto. I do not think it's that much in real life or in paper. But this is a value deck, right? Like, this has a ton of mana dork. It has the mana dorks that are available in the format, which shockingly these are all legal. You can play these cards. You have Reanimate, Unearth, Cling to Dust, great value card. And basically you have a lot of cards that either draw you cards, get cards back, like Eternal Taskmaster, like Genesis. And then you have ETB creatures like Conclave Naturalist, Civic Wayfinder, which seems pretty low power level, but you have some big clunky spells like Palaka Worm, like Triskelion, like Duplicant, like Feasting Troll King, that all generally have pretty positive effects on board states or in game states. With Palaka Worm, it just gains you a ton of life. It tends to clock folks, and if it dies, it draws you cards. And it's also not a bad deal if your cards die because again, you're a Recurring Nightmare deck, so these ETBs are going to kind of be used as spells. The Recurring Nightmare. So cards like Civic Wayfinder, like Viridian Emissary, Satyr Wayfinder, these ramp cards, are going to build up your resources. And why is it important to build up resources? Well, this is not a spell-heavy deck. It's a permanent-heavy deck. As you can see, it's 44 creatures and 37 lands. So, we're playing cards like Death Cloud, which, if your opponent's deck has less permanents or they have less permanents in play, they're going to tend to lose out to Death Cloud. And again, you can cast Death Cloud because you don't really care about your creatures dying. You'll just reanimate them with Recurring Nightmare eventually. And typically speaking, they're all 2-for-1 creatures with the exception of like the literal mana dorks like Deathcap Cultivators, Paradise Druid, and that's in the 2 spot. Grim Prophet, just a straight up mana dork, although it does mill you 2 cards, which is kind of nice. It's also randomly a 3/1, so it can attack. So really this is kind of just like a mid-range deck that has an incidental value engine in the form of Recurring Nightmare. It doesn't have any true combos in it, but it just basically tries to win with card quality. Size of threats like Desecration Demon is just huge. You can also randomly use it as a sack outlet if you want to, if you're not going to kill with it in a couple turns. Gonti, just to get value. Cards like Necrotal, which have not seen play in forever, kind of like Flame Tongue. This is the Flame Tongue Kavu in black. And then like cards like that replace themselves. Phyrexian Rager, you have Dusk Legion Zealot here. You have Mire Triton, which sort of replaces itself, also just a life gain. Also builds up your graveyard for Recurring Nightmare, similar to like your or your Skull Prophet here. You have cards like Ravenous Rats that you can use to incrementally chip on a blue player's hand with Recurring Nightmare over time. Deathcap Cultivator just ramp. Elvish Visionary replaces itself. Satyr Wayfinder replaces itself with a land, but it also fills up your bin for Recurring Nightmare. So you kind of see the idea of the deck. We do have a couple pointed removal spells, like you saw up here. I think I covered over it. Yeah, Ultimate Price, Putrefy, Hero's Downfall, Ruinous Path are all in this deck. And then you also have Yahenni's Expertise. So basically the best of what's available as far as removal in the format to deal with threats. The deck, because it doesn't care about a lot of its cards, or its cards can die and they've already provided value, whether it be drawing a card or providing mana, runs cards like Yahenni's Expertise. You also have like Gravebreaker Lamia, which is just a 5-mana 4/4 lifelinker that also can set up Cling to Dust, can put the right target like Palaka Worm in the graveyard if you already have Recurring Nightmare, can put Genesis in your graveyard if you just want to start getting cards back and rebuilding your board state. A couple other interesting cards. You have Gaze of Granite, which is similar to Death Cloud. It only deals with permanents, though, but it's quite powerful. And then Erebos' Command. This card is, I think, probably a staple in the black color pie of this format because graveyards tend to be a source of advantage in this format because it's a little slower and grindier. Folks are going to look to get incremental advantage out of the bin, i.e. this style of deck right here, which is very heavily graveyard-based, but can also just play like kind of a fair incremental mid-range game plan as well. I do think, at least as far as the decks I'm going to showcase, is probably the best of them. There are decks that I have that I think beat this, but they will tend to lose to the aggressive decks because of how they're built. But like basically, how do you beat this deck? You beat it with blue decks. This tends to eat red deck and white weenie. Eats their lunch pretty easily. All right, so going on to like what maybe a control style deck looks like in this format. We have blue-white control. So I have tested this deck against red deck wins. I think I maybe won a game in a match. It's not good. It's a pretty hard matchup if you were in a very aggressive metagame. But one of the things I found is that like a deck like this does help balance out the mid-range strats like the Rock or like Jund in the format because it tends to beat them. The games tend to feel very close, but I have found that I often never felt like I was really losing. This is a pretty old-school style control deck because you don't have any 4-mana Wraths in the format. I think there's one 4-mana Wrath in the format. It's an instant speed one, and it's if destroy all creatures that dealt damage to you this turn, all tap creatures that did damage to you this turn. Forget the name of the card, but it's pretty bad. So you have very expensive white Wraths in this format that you can use. You also randomly have Gideon Jura, which essentially can act as a moat for a couple turns, can also pick off creatures, and can also kill your opponent, which is a pretty strong. It's a good way to finish games out. But this is pretty much your long-term control deck. As you can see, not a lot of cantrips available to blue. You have Opt, Peak. I'm playing Scrabbling Claws in this deck because, like I said, I think graveyards are pretty important, at least as the format stands right now. But you don't have your Ponders, you don't have your Preordains, you have your Brainstorms, your Portents, Serum Visions, you name it. You don't have any of that. You got these two. And then you got a bunch of 2-mana ones. So basically your cantrips start happening at 2, which means you're a slower deck to react, which means the aggressive decks are going to tend to stomp on you pretty hard. And if they play well, which they generally will, like even if you get to 5 mana and tap out for your End Hostilities or Fumigate, which are in the deck, or Planner Outburst, any of these big Wraths, or Faded Retribution at 7, they're probably going to have enough burn in hand to finish you off. So that's kind of the problem you run into. Anyways, that said, you look through, you got stuff like Revitalize, which is a cantrip. It also randomly gains you 3 life. Birth of Meletus, which finds you mana base, or helps your mana base get developed, gets you to the white mana you need for your Wrath by turn 5. This is a lighter white deck. It's about probably half the amount of islands, or a little under half the amount of islands. Also gains you random life and puts a blocker in play. You have cards like Anticipate, Augur Bolus, which is randomly really great against the aggressive decks because it just blocks the 1/3. And then you have some of your counter spells. You have Disdainful Stroke, Latnam's Legacy, which is a fine cantrip for a control style deck. Mana Leak, Memory Lapse, 2 of the better 2-mana counter spells. Negate, also up there. Prohibit, which is okay. It's better on the play than it is the draw, obviously. Omen, good card. Quench, just you're playing cards like Quench and Revolutionary Rebuff because honestly my experience has been just in Magic generally, 2-mana counter spells are a lot different than 3-mana counter spells, and you don't want these cards versus other control decks, but you really do want them versus aggro decks because you need to be able to respond, especially on the draw against turn 3 plays. If you're getting beat down by their first 2 threats, you can generally live to 5 and possibly be in a good spot. But if you're allowing their turn 1 through 3 to resolve, you're in a rough spot. Because most of the unconditional counters in this format are going to be 3 mana. Shimmer, just a worse but still an impulse. Telling Time, again, just more cantrips. Trade Routes. So one of the engines in this deck is that you have Trade Routes plus Mystic Sanctuary, which is actually a combo you can run in Canadian Highlander as well, and Blue-White Control and Blue-White Miracles there. Generally, you're just going to loop Ancestrals and just win the game very easily. With it in this format, it's a lot more incremental, but it is a great long game engine that's nigh unbeatable once you have it acquired and the board is at parity. You have Azorius Charm to kind of keep yourself alive. Same time, you also have Warrant, which has a similar effect to Azorius Charm. Dovin's Veto, randomly legal, just a better negate. Thematic Compass. One of the cards I really wanted to play in this deck was Thawing Glaciers. Unfortunately, Glaciers is too bad. It's too slow. Thematic Compass kind of has somewhat of a Glaciers effect. And then you also have Eternal Dragon, which can randomly be a threat, but is also just a Planesfinder. And it's a recurring source of card advantage. Once you've achieved control over the board state, you can start returning this and finding more lands out of your deck and just thin your deck out and get as many lands as you possibly can on the board. Want to make land drops every turn with this deck. You get to the 3 spot, you have Banishing Light, Exile, which is kind of a hinky removal spell, but there's not really a lot of good 2-mana removal in white and blue. You can do Bounce, but this is a card advantage style deck, so you really don't want to be bouncing because you're kind of just, you want to 1-for-1 for a while and then blow them out on the board for the stuff that doesn't resolve. Exile is a way to get life back. It also deals with a lot of some of the creature lands that are in the format. Obviously, not being able to deal with white creatures is problematic, but the life gain's pretty big on this. It's also instant speed, which is kind of nice. So if there's creature land threats that these cards don't deal with as well, it's kind of nice. Fate Retribution can get them, but it's yeah. Oblivion Ring, Banishing Light, yep, just good to deal with the Planeswalkers in the format or enchantments, artifacts that may have gotten in under counter magic. Renewed Faith, again, you have to stay alive in this deck. You sometimes do actually hardcast this, just hardcast it for 6. Specifically, when you get to this card, this is one of the other engines that I put in the deck, is Dovin's Acuity. So you have cards like Revitalize that just keep you alive in the early to mid game, and Renewed Faith. And in a long game, if you draw them late and you have a Dovin's Acuity, you can just cast the main phase and return the Dovin's Acuity to get double value off of them with the Acuity, because how Acuity works, you gain 2 life, you draw a card, and whenever you cast an instant spell during your main phase, you get to return it. This is a really bizarre card. I've actually haven't played with it outside of draft, and it's been very good in this style of build. You have Complicate, Court Hussar, again, a good blocker, and just finds you a card, replaces itself. Exclude, one of the better 3-mana counters. There's a lot of creatures in the format because it is a penny, it's penny dreadful. So there's not going to be as many planeswalkers. I believe there's only one, I believe, that's actually legal. It's the 3-mana planeswalker, and it's Jace Beleren, or Party Jace, as folks like to call him. You have the litany of 3-mana counter spells. There are, I believe, 12 available. This deck is not playing all of them, but it's playing most of them. I'm not playing the ones that actually mill my opponent. There are 2 that mill your opponent. I think it's Didn't Say Please, and there's another one that does that. They're not that great because milling folks in this format has tended to be, in my experience, bad. If I'm playing Scrabbling Claws, I don't want to really mill people. But these are all 3-mana counter spells. You have Jace Beleren here, and then Dovin's Acuity, which I already talked. Faith's Fetters. In some ways an upgrade, in some ways a downgrade to Oblivion Ring. It's obviously more mana. The gaining 4 life is kind of nice, but the card does stay on board. There's some decks that have sacrifice sub-themes, so like leaving a creature on board can be kind of relevant. But yeah, this is a very powerful card. This can also target lands randomly, and there are some lands that you would want to turn off in the format. To note, you have cards like, Field of Ruin could be one. The biggest one's probably like cards like Labyrinth of Skopos. I don't know if that's going to matter for this deck as much. Then like Urza's Factory, which can be like a control closer, which this deck's also running. Chemister's Insight and Fact or Fiction, some of the better 4-mana draw spells in the format. Dovin Bond, randomly legal in this format. Great card in this deck. Gains you life, draws you cards, makes threats small. I've never ultimated it. Normally I just down tick it until it dies, or if I'm not at board parity, I up tick it and then down tick it and then deal with the board. Ojutai's Command, this card is just really good. I've actually returned creatures with this because I am playing Court Hussar and I am playing Honor Bullis, so sometimes you do that. Typically speaking, you're just going to counter a creature spell and either gain 4 or draw a card. The Wrath, so 5 mana is basically your board control. You also have Value Contradict because this is like it's 1 more mana expensive Dismiss. I have considered playing Bone Dash because creatures are so big in this format, which Bone Dash is a double blue 2 card that counters a creature spell and draws you a card. But I think that the flexibility on Contradict is just a lot more powerful, and this is a big mana deck. The games are going to go a little bit longer for it, and this card just kind of does that. You also have Desertion, which is a 5-mana counter again, and if it counters an artifact or creature, you get to basically have that card on the board, which can be pretty powerful against some of a lot of the decks, honestly. And it also has sick Richard Kane Ferguson art. The main win con of the deck is Approach of the Second Sun. This is a great win con for the deck. It randomly gains you life. You're a big mana deck. It generally tends to get there with this. This is how I've typically killed folks. I think I've killed folks with Gideon one time, but typically speaking, I kill with this. Fate of Retribution. So Fate of Retribution, again, just a big wrath. It's instant speed. If you do it on your main phase, you get to scry. Also works with Dovin's Acuity in the deck if you want to do it main phase. But this is quite a powerful card. Pretty good in the deck. And then, to kind of add to the 2-mana counters, Power Sync can be a 2-mana counter, which is actually why it's in the deck. Same with Syncopate. I generally don't like running X counters in these decks, but I felt like the 2-mana counter spell density was too low in the deck, and I wanted to have more interactive plays to do on turn 2 against the aggressive decks of the format, so I'm playing both of these, even though I'm not a huge fan of the cards. Repeal, way to bounce anything that may need to get bounced. Pull from Tomorrow, way to get vast card advantage at instant speed if you don't need to use your counter spells and you have enough mana. Launch this thing off, get back up on cards. You also have Commit to Memory, which is one way to reshuffle the deck back together. Commit's just a counter spell, and it's a 4-mana counter spell that does not put something in the graveyard, which is kind of nice. Memory's nice because you're going to tend to get a pretty massive mana advantage with this deck. 1 year 39 land deck, which I said, you don't have these 1-mana cantrips. You need to play more lands and control to have it function. And you'll see if you try to play it at 37 or 36, which is like generally like around where Canadian Highlander tends to play, depending on your curve. You'll notice a pretty marked difference in the performance of these style of decks because you'll just miss on lands too much. And one of the best ways to die with a deck like this is to not make your land drops basically forever. So you want to do that. That's why there's so many lands in the deck. But yeah, this is blue-white control. This is a control deck in the format. Then I'm going to cover one combo build. Combo is a little more hinky in this format. You can see I have a sideboard in this one because there's some. I'm still working on this deck. As far as the mana base goes, you can look it up in Scryfall. Your mana base is in 3 colors is going to be tough, right? That's why I've tried to show you like a 1 color and two color decks. You got a 3 color deck here, and it actually works out fine because this is really a green X or blue green X deck, just splashing red for a couple effects, basically for winning. But you have the guild gates. You have like these life gain cards. I don't know what these are called. I don't think they have a nickname. Evolving Wilds is legal as a fetch land for basics. You have the guild gates available. You also have Mystic Sanctuary randomly legal. But you're going to be playing a lot of basics. You also have these 1 damage every time you tap them lands. And I think in blue-black you have one that doesn't untap the next turn. But anyways, you're going to be playing a lot of basic lands, which means that general your mana capacity has to be larger because you need to draw more lands, because less of your lands are going to help cast your spells basically as an exchange of like 1 land to 1 spell, right? So like what I mean by that is like I'm playing more basic lands, therefore like I need to run just generally more lands because I will need to draw more of them just to be able to cast all the spells that I draw in the deck. When I have less dual lands. Dual lands, in a way, are kind of card advantage in deck building. They do free up slots. Cantrips can kind of do the same thing when they're being used primarily for mana fixing. This deck goes even heavier on cantrips. It runs some less optimal ones, but because it's a storm deck, right? This is actually a storm deck. It's a very slow storm deck. It's a heartbeat storm deck. But you're playing cards like Obsessive Search, which sometimes can combo out with cards like Frantic Search, or other discard effects like Thrill of Possibility, Fire Prophecy. I don't believe discards it. Yeah, it puts it at the bottom of your deck. But there are a couple cards like that. You have Cathartic Reunion as well as discards to draw. Basically, you want every draw effect you can get because these are very cheap cards, and you're really just using them to build up storm count and to essentially play less cards in your deck. So you can see we have Opt and Peak, which are two of the cantrips that I'm playing in the control deck. The rest of these are kind of just replacement level, like Quicken, Obsessive Search, although Quicken actually can sometimes be relevant when you're trying to cast like a Brain Geyser on your OP's end step, or an Animist Awakening on your OP's end step just to ramp yourself up by a lot. Reach Through Mist is literally just a cantrip. It's just pay a blue, draw a card. Whispers, I've never gone with buyback on this. Again, it's just another card that kind of just replaces itself. Witching Well, you could possibly cut this. You could draw 2 off of it for basically a 1 mana card that allows you to draw 2 later on when you have a ton of mana. Isn't the worst. And you also get the Scry off of it, which this is a deck that has... Honestly, it looks like it have high variance. It actually works pretty well, but it's slow, right? It's basically a 6 to 7 turn clock to storm someone out. And you do have some protection in here, but it's fairly low on the protection. You have Magus the Candelabra. Candelabra is not legal, and the reason Magus is in this deck is the idea you're doing in this deck is you have Mana Flare, you have Heartbeat of Spring, and then you have a bunch of cost reducers like Primal Amulet, Jace's Sanctum, which these are just cards that reduce the casting cost of cards. This one eventually flips, or you can flip it, you don't have to, and it doubles up spells based on the mana the land produces. And then a bunch of ramps. So basically, like how you get to having like Dark Ritual and Black Lotus style mana is you use a bunch of ramp spells, and then you cast a unilateral effect that basically acts as a doubling cube for all your mana. There are more of these effects available in the format. Of note, there's Doubling Cube, and there is Mana Reflection, I want to say the card is, which is a 6-drop. Mana Reflection is a 6-drop that doubles all the mana produced by every permanent you have, but it's 6 mana, so it's too expensive. And the Doubling Cube, unfortunately, is broken. It's a 2-mana artifact, pay 3, tap it, and you can double the amount of each type of mana in your mana pool. I had it in here originally because I thought it was close enough, but it doesn't work. it just eats your mana. It doesn't do anything. So don't play that card in this deck. But if it were working, I would play that card in this deck. Basically, what you do is just ramp a ton, and then you get one of these effects out, and you just go ham. You basically loop your whole deck. And then, once you've looped your whole deck enough, you can kill folks in a lot of ways with the deck. You can use Ironcrag Pyromancer to kill folks. This is also just kind of a random control card to like stay alive in the early to mid game against aggressive decks. It's a 0/4 that blocks. It also can blink things. The deck has a very easy time drawing multiple cards on any given turn because of all the instant speed draw effects that are in it. So you can generally like 3 and then 3, like 3 on your turn when you cast this, then 3 on their turn as well, and do basically 6 over the course of a turn with it to 2 different separate targets. You have cards like Grape Shot, and you have Empty the Warrens. I am of the opinion that Empty the Warrens is probably suboptimal in this deck, and I think I would like to change it over to Kaervek's Torch. Ignite Memories is also legal, which you see in my sideboard, because I'm still kind of working on this deck. Although, the issue with Ignite Memories is if your opponent's emptied their hand and like you're on like basically not a draw 7 style kind of draw, Ignite Memories is kind of rough against like your White Weenie and Red Deck Wins decks, so if they just have a land in hand or if their hand's empty, this does nothing. Empty is a little slow, I've found in my experience, so I think Kaervek's Torch could make more sense. Another thing you could do is leave Empty in and then put in Scourge Prospector and then use this as a mana ritual. That'd be kind of an interesting way to use it to make a lot of red mana. Unfortunately, the deck doesn't need a ton of red mana. But I think Kaervek's Torch is probably more correct than this. You could also use Demon Fire. Bane Fire is not legal, unfortunately. Demon Fire is a little awkward in this deck, though, because Demon Fire requires you to have 0 cards in hand when you cast it to actually be uncounterable. And actually, let me pull that card up so you can see it. Demon Fire is red X sorcery, deal X damage to Fireball. Deals to one target, creature or player. You can't split it like you can a Fireball. And if you have no cards in hand, Demon Fire is uncounterable. So it's a card you could play for it, but unfortunately, this deck it draws so many cards. It'll have lands stuck in its hand. Typically speaking, you can't play. You don't have a fast bond to get rid of lands out of your hand. So I didn't think that was a useful win con. Caravax Torch is probably just better, though, than Empty the Warrens. I could be wrong on that. There could be a blue matchup where Empty the Warrens is just better because, like, they try to counter all your spells and you just cast this thing last and get, 6 or 8 power on the board and they can't do anything about it. Anyway, yeah. The deck is mostly card draw. You still have Augur. Augur is kind of a rock star on most of these spell style lists. As you can see, this only has 10 creatures, so it's likely to hit very often unless it just hits mana sources. And it's just good at blocking. Omen, again, one of the best cantrips. Peer Through Depths, not playing in the blue-white control deck. This card's great in this deck, though. It helps you find your win con, helps you find your untapper, your card draw, whatever it might be. Scour, just fine. This is a little overcosted for most of the other decks, but this deck makes so much mana that just having more card draw is good. Shimmer, yep. Telling Time, yep. Cathartic Reunion, yep. We're playing this because our card relevance is going to vary pretty highly in this deck, and basically paying 2 to get rid of 2 completely dead cards out of our hand and draw 3 fresh cards is generally going to be good. Fire Prophecy, not a bad control card in the early game. Also, again, just gets rid of dead cards in your hand and gets you to new stuff. Grape Shot, one of the win cons. Also, a way to actually do like a mid-game board control plan. If you can only do a mini storm and you can't kill your opponent, you can just wipe their board real fast with it and then get it back later. Thrill Possibility, again, draw, discard. Instant speed, though, which is very nice on this card. Visionary, just a decent chump blocker in the early game and replaces itself, which is kind of nice. Nature's Lore, just a ramp spell. Rampant Growth, also legal. These are the only 2 literal ramp spells legal at 2 in green, so we're playing both of them. Obviously, Nature's Lore is a little bit awkward because it only finds a forest. This is mostly a blue deck. Rampant Growth, a little bit of higher quality. We're playing Regrowth in this deck to get back, anything that we may need. Generally speaking, it's going to be like a turnabout to untap our mana after we get like a Mana Flare or a Heartbeat down. Sylvan Library. Honestly, most of the games I've had, it's nice to have this, but typically speaking, I haven't had a lot of testing with it. I think it's probably fine. This deck doesn't have... This deck has a few shuffle effects, probably not as many as the Rock deck does. The Rock deck probably has more shuffles. But this has a lot of card draw, so essentially it can be like a verisimilitude of shuffling because you draw so much over the course of a turn cycle. Wall Blossoms, again, good against the aggro decks, also really cheap, and just replaces itself really easily. Goblin Electromancer, one of the cheapest cost reducers on instants and sorceries, which this deck is primarily comprised of. Growth Spiral, again, another ramp spell, also just a random draw spell, also instant speed. Prophetic Prism can help you fix your mana for whatever colors you may need, and also just replaces itself. Champion of Wits, good card to have against aggressive decks, replaces itself, or actually, it loots for you, and also allows you to get it back later and actually add card advantage, basically act as a divination with some selection. It's actually careful consideration is what it acts as later. Draw 4, discard 2. Forbidden Alchemy. So we do have a light black splash. I'm playing the blue-black duels that are available in the format to cast back Forbidden Alchemy. This builds up your graveyard, which is nice, and also gets you very deep in your deck. Frantic Search, very relevant in this deck and most of these style of decks because we're playing mana doublers in the deck. Frantic Search with the untap effect actually generates mana and gets you through cards. Midnight Clock is actually a draw 7 in the deck because you produce an obscenely large amount of mana. And I'll show some gameplay with this deck. It produces an obscene amount of mana. You can do this all in one turn. You can just draw 7 off this thing in one turn for damn near infinite mana. I mean, it's not infinite, but it's a lot. Thirst for Meaning. Thirst for Knowledge, not legal in the format. Probably better in this deck. I think there are actually there may be more enchantments in this build. Anyways, Thirst for Knowledge is not legal, but Thirst for Meaning is, and just being able to draw 3 and discard 2 is a good effect, especially at instant speed if you're not doing anything else with your time. Gets you to the right cards. Iron Crag, we talked. It's actually randomly a win con. It also keeps you alive. Merchant of the Veil is really a one-drop. This is a one-time loot, and it turns into actually a really good card engine in the late game. One of the ways that you get through lands is use this card early. It stays in exile, and then when you get to a point where you have multiple untaps with these style effects, Heartbeat and Mana Flare, you can use Merchant to actually just get rid of all the lands that you draw because you have so much mana is not an issue. It's cards at that point. and paying 3 is almost nothing. And because this notably does not tap to have its effect, you can continuously loot through cards with Merchant of the Veil, which is very powerful. Radiant Flames, just a control card. This is a 3 plus, like 3.25 color deck. It's splashing black just for Forbidden Alchemy. You can blow up a lot of creature decks with this. I actually do have Pyroclasm on the board. I don't know that the red deck wins matchup is made that much better by playing these cards, but I do think that like cards like Radiant Flames do kind of help you on against some of the mid-range builds, which I'll showcase some of those games. Haro is actually exceedingly powerful in this deck. I'm also playing the Spring Bloom Druid, but it's actually less powerful in this build. Haro's an interesting card, right? Because technically you go down 1 mana when you cast this without any sort of cost enablers. But when you're running the mana doublers and then like Primal Amulet and cards like the Electromancer, those effects that are in the deck, you actually net mana by casting it, and you also thin your deck out, which is relevant when you're drawing as many cards as you draw with this deck. Like thinning your deck is relevant because you can see you can see 50 cards in a turn, like on the big turns you have. So yeah, you have these effects basically to thin the deck, and also just to ramp you. They ramp you, whether you're doing it as an incremental plan in the mid game before you want to set up your big win turn, or if you're doing it in the middle of a combo just to generate more mana. This card can generate more mana during combos. Heartbeat is just a newer copy of Mana Flare. Spring Bloom Druid, similar to Haro, less disruptible than Haro, but also of less power than Haro because the lands come into play tapped. Saheeli, this card is just in here as a win con. This just puts a lot of blockers in the way. Another thing I found I can sometimes do with it is I'll copy a Goblin Electromancer just to get the cost down even further on some of my cards, or I've copied Ironcrag Pyromancer to get 2 of them going at one time, if that was like lethal exactly that turn. But generally speaking, it just puts a lot of tokens on the board. It's kind of like a Pyromancer for the deck. It's relatively cheap and just blocks. It buys time. Electrolyze, again, just a burn spell that replaces itself. So when you're dealing with like weenie creatures, this can be pretty good. Just 2 for 1, or basically 3 for 1. Then you kill 2 things on the board and then get a card off of it. Fever Visions, this card could possibly be cut. I have it in here for the blue matchups because this is a Storm deck that can sometimes struggle with blue decks because it has so many setup cards, and if they know how to play against it, it can be a little more challenging. But this right here can lock out blue decks. And again, like the aggressive matchup's so bad that I was like, I'm just going to put this in here because I feel like it's going to really shore up my mid-range matchups and my control matchups to a high extent. When you get the 4s, you have Draw, Chemistry's Insight, as I said before, and then Fact or Fiction, probably the 2 best 4-mana draw spells. I have Deep Analysis in this deck, which can operate as a 2-drop. Sometimes you discard it with cards like Thrill of Possibility or the other effects that we already saw, or you just bin it with Fact or Fiction, they don't give it to you. And you can cast it for 2 and draw some cards. Jace's Sanctum, already talked, Cost Reducer. Archaeomancer is actually pretty relevant in this deck. Typically speaking, what you get back is the next card, Turnabout, to generate a ton of mana. It's also why you have Regrowth in the deck. And you can kind of go into some like really weird loops with like repeal on Archaeomancer to actually make mana. It's kind of cool. Empty the Warrens, current win con, but like I said, I think it should probably be Karavek's Spite. But Empty does have some merits in certain matchups. I'm sorry, Karavek's Spite, Karavek's Torch. Circuitous Route, this is one of the best 4-mana ramp spells. There's actually not a ton of 3-mana ramp spells, so like Cultivate and Kodama's Reach are both illegal in the format. And when you get into this spot, like your cards like Sky Shroud Claim and those cards are not legal. Circuitous Route is a pretty good one though. This can find up to 2 basic lands and or gate cards. You can actually find gates with this as well to actually like fix your mana up. And again, it's just ramp. This deck's looking to get a very large mana advantage. This is kind of just one of the best cards at doing it at 4 mana. Garruk, randomly legal, untaps lands. Very good with Mana Flares and Heartbeat style effects. Primal Amulet, again, this is just a cost reducer initially, and if you want to flip it, you can flip it into the Primal Wellspring, which you can tap for a colored source of mana, and it will copy your spell, whatever you cast with it. Then you have Prophetic Bolt, which is just a decentish control card. It's also an impulse, which is really the big reason you're using it for basically the damage plus the impulse on it to get deeper in your deck. Jace's Ingenuity, probably one of the better 5-mana draw spells in this format. Then you have Discovery right here, which I've never used this personal side, but Discovery is pretty good. You get to Surveil 2 and then draw a card. You have Brain Geyser. This is another win con in the deck. You can force your opponent. I've killed folks with just making them draw 50 or 80 cards or whatever in the deck because you produce a lot of mana. Pull from Tomorrow, just another way to set up a lot of draws. Repeal, again, just a fairly decent card. You can bounce certain things with it, like Archaeomancer, or like your early, looters that you may have. Get a free card off of it, and then ideally get another card off of whatever you're bouncing with it. Or You use it against aggressive decks to put them back on tempo and get another draw deeper to find your land drop or whatever it might be. Animist Awakening. This card's kind of ridiculous. Like, I've really liked this card in this format specifically for this style of deck. One, it's a ramp spell. It's a ridiculously big ramp spell. The way the card's designed is intended not to make you mana. So, the way this card works is really bizarre. It's green X. You reveal the top X cards of your library, and you put all land cards from among them into the battlefield tapped. The rest of the bottom, and Spell Mastery, if there are more than two, or if there are two or more instances in your sorcery cards in your graveyard, you untap those lands. So, ostensibly, like, your deck, you're not going to pay green X and then hit, like, exactly X lands, right? So, it's not going to net you mana. This deck's not going to have an issue getting spells in the graveyard. It's the sorceries. That's mostly what it does. But you're never really going to hit X. So, the way that you actually break parity with this is you use cards like Mana Flare and Heartbeat of Spring. And what this is used to do is generate a thinning effect on the deck when you have vast mana advantage given those cards. So that each of your draws are more powerful. And then when you go to loop your deck with Memory or with Midnight Clock, you can't hit lands anymore. You just hit gas. One of the cool things you can do with this, and Quicken, this is one of the cards that I tend to use with Quicken if I'm going to use Quicken for its actual purpose of giving a sorcery instant speed. This card and then Geyser are the two cards I tend to do. I'll leave up mana, and I may have options with like Electrolyze or whatever. But you quicken a Geyser, quicken this card, and you get a vast mana advantage on the next turn. If you're casting this for 6 or 7 on turn 4 or 5, because of your other ramp spells you've already cast to boost your mana up, you're looking okay on the next turn to actually win. And like I said, this is generally a turn 6 to 7 deck, but it does have control elements to kind of help it stay alive up to that point. But yeah, this is Combo Storm. There are quite a few other lists I've explored. I'm not going to cover them all ad nauseum. I just kind of want to cover some different archetypes that are viable in the format. You have more radical builds that are like combo decks like this right here, which is actually a Lich's Mastery combo deck that uses cards like Zurin Orb and Overgrown Estate to gain life off sacking lands, Ivory Towers, and just like random cards like Revitalize or Birth of Meletus or Moment of Craving or Mire Triton just to gain random incremental life that turns into card draw, which is actually also kind of an interesting archetype. One of the things I found with like these combo decks is that like they do what they should do in Magic, which is beat up on decks like this, like Rock Midrange, which I just talked about. Same with Control beating up on this. And then these decks beat up on these decks, the red deck wins deck. So you kind of have like, in my opinion, like a fairly balanced meta. Now the format's relatively underexplored. There's probably only like 20 to 30 folks that are really active in the Discord on it. And that's kind of why I'm trying to draw up interest, because I think there's a lot of interesting things you can do with it, and a lot of interesting things you can explore. Whether it be the decks I covered, or decks like Big Red, where you playing, Destructive Forces and Burning of Xingyi's, which this deck's perfectly fine. Black Red Sacrifice. I don't even know if this is complete. I hope it is. Yeah, this is kind of like an Aristocrats deck right here with like Cat Combo and then a bunch of like, cards like Mayhem Devil. And then like this guy, Sir Conrad. You have 100-card Grixis right here in PD, which is also pretty sweet. It's a sweet mid-range deck. Mono Black Control. You can do a lot of stuff in the format, and Sui B. If you're like me and you like to build bad aggro decks, you can play Sui B. Soul Spike's even legal. You kind of have like a partial Carvac Spite. Blue Black Control, also a good control shell. This is more mid-rangey shell or tempo-y shell. White Weenie. Just a ton of stuff you can do, right? Like just a lot you can do. And it tends to be more value-centric. The aggro decks do lose a little bit on their low end, so they become a little more mid-rangey. You got Goblins in the format. Blue-Red Tempo, another deck I built. This deck's been all right. It's been fine. It's obviously better against the control than the combo decks of the format, but yeah. So there's just a lot you can do, and I'm still exploring it myself, but I kind of wanted to, put up a video on it and expose it, because, like, for me, like, what I enjoy in Magic is building decks. And then playing them, and then tuning them, and then, hopefully making them successful decks, and then get other folks to play them, and then hopefully inspiring other folks to build decks, because, I mean, that's, to me, like, I would just get bored if all I did is play, 4 Tarmogoyfs and 4 Force of Wills all the time. And sometimes I do that, and then I get bored of it. And I go back and try to find something interesting to do in the game, because I love this game a lot, but, it's like anything, variety is the spice of life, right? So, I'm going to go on a quick pause there, guys, and I'm going to jump into some gameplay so you can kind of see the interchange of some of these different decks that are out there, what some other folks have been working on in the format, and then we'll call it after that. So, let me go on a quick pause. I'll be right back. Alright, guys, we're back. We're playing a game against Isaac, GS459er here. And, this hand, so what we are playing is the last deck that I was showcasing or talking through, which was the Storm combo deck, Heartbeat combo. And this hand's acceptable. I mean, I don't know what Isaac's going to be on. Looks like a green deck. Actually, I probably do at the time. I think they're on rock. So it's got a ramp spell. It's got a couple draw spells, like pretty much what you can hope for. My mana's fixed, and I just need to draw card draw spells, and I'll get card draw spells and ramp, and I'll get through my cards. So definitely playing the rock, which is actually the deck that I showcase. I think it's probably a slightly older version. I've been working on the deck a bit. I do go ahead and just frantic search here to get value off my obsessive search and get a little deeper in the deck. I'm going to be able to resolve the Witching Well. I don't need to peak quite yet, and I want to set up my next draws. I bottom both lands here, because I'm looking for non-land cards at this point in time. I could have opted to save the Frantic Search for a doubling effect, but I kind of just wanted to get through cards. My hand didn't have a lot of gas in it. Find a Primal Amulet here, play out my tapped land, end up dropping the Primal Amulet to be a cost reducer on the following turn to get a pull from Tomorrow's for, what is this for, 5 on the following turn. They play on a 5-4, so my life total is under some threat here. They play out a Deep Forest Hermit, so I'm going to be dead relatively soon. I need to draw here. Be dead if I don't do anything by next turn, I think. This is, 6 damage? Yeah, I'm dead next turn. I think by a -2 or something like that. So I'm going to draw 5 here, discard 1 off the pull from Tomorrow. Get my first counter on Primal Amulet, which requires 4 counters to actually flip over if I want to do that. Go ahead and get rid of the Forbidden Alchemy, which honestly may have been a mistake. Go ahead and cast the Nature's Lore here. Oop, oop. I'm wondering... Oh, because I'm dead. I can't win this turn. So take the safer line, I think. I want to actually set up the Mana Flare on the following turn. I'm just going to Prof Bolt their biggest threat and basically say, hey, you have to kill me next turn, which is going to be pretty tough for their deck. They're not playing pump spells. They're playing a value deck, so most of what they have they can do is going to be on board. They'll be able to do other things with their hand, but it's not going to be direct damage on this turn. So they're going to start getting value. They can loop their... the Recurring Nightmare. They play it out and leave it in play, which I actually think is a very smart play against this deck because I do have a draw 7 on board, and if they put it back in their hand, I could, possibly draw 7 on the next turn. Go ahead and copy my Factor Fiction to get deeper in the deck. Believe I take the 4-up pile. And take the 4-up pile again. Get a little deeper in the deck. Trying to look to see if I can find an untapper here. Unfortunately, I miss on the untapper. So what I'm going to do is just actually cast out a bunch of goblins. Their mana is going to be doubled next turn as well. But I'm likely going to be able to live because I have a ton of blockers right now. And they don't have any trampling threats. That was kind of the idea with this line of play. So they're going to go ahead and do the value thing that their deck does. They get out a Palaka Worm. Their life total is not going to be that relevant. They do have to cast on Yahenni's Expertise, which wipes most of their board, but they're able to get some card advantage off this Recurring Nightmare with the Palaka Worm and the Deep Forest Hermit, and I'm very dead on the following turn. So get another counter here. I can try to Radiant Flames. That's still going to lead me to dead, to the Palaka Worm, which I can't currently stop. So I go ahead and do is try to get a little bit lucky on this Animist Awakening, and then I'm going to scour possibilities afterwards. I am copying it, so I'm assuming it's going to net me more mana than what I invest into it. So this is for essentially 30 cards. And hopefully Moto doesn't break, so I get like 6 or 7 there, and then like 6 or 7 there. So, one of them was a tap land, though, because it was Evolving Wilds. But I did net mana out of it, essentially. Harrow also nets me mana here. Go ahead and do this, get another Cantrip. Cantrip, find Quicken and some other stuff. I think I bottom one and then top the other. I find Saheeli, but Saheeli's not going to get me around Trample more than likely. So I dig with this. I believe I make a play error here. Actually, I know I do. I found my untapper. This is where I actually have the game won here. I misplay this game because for whatever reason, I accidentally cast Deep Analysis. I don't accidentally do it. I thought it was 2 for whatever reason. I haven't played the card in forever. And I just kill myself, which is pretty bad. But I have this one won because I essentially have near infinite mana post untap, and I have this Midnight Clock. So what I'm trying to do here is just generate a little bit of value with the remaining cards I have, and maybe I find another untapper if I'm lucky, or a regrowth effect to get back the turnabout. Then the idea is to dump all my mana into Midnight Clock and then recycle my deck back together with far less lands in it because I basically ripped all of them out with the Animist Awakening, I think it is. Yeah, Animist Awakening. And then basically find enough cantrips and draw spells to basically draw back into my draw back into my grape shot or my empty the warrens or whatever, and then basically just win the game. They're at 33, but the Stormgod's at 12. Like essentially, this deck's gonna get to a point where it can loop itself over and over again, or at least it can loop itself like 3 times because both the loop effects exile themselves. This exiles itself when it loops, and then the memory. The commit to memory also gets rid of itself, but I will have a very thin deck because of how many lands are out, and it's more than likely with like not infinite, but like probably like 40 mana on the board that I'm going to be able to dig far enough to find my win cons when I loop. So I think I technically won this one right here. I was going to win this one right here, and I end up just whiffing it. So there is that. I'll be right back for game number 2, guys. Hey guys, we're back. Sorry, a little bit of the replay. So we had land go. In this format, that'll tend to happen. There's a couple mana dorks, but generally it's going to be land go on turn 1, sometimes turn 2. OP plays out Viridian Emissary. This hand looks perfectly acceptable. It's a little bit slow. I'm going to get out this card so I can get through my deck. Probably ditch a forest and a repeal here. Chemistry's Insight makes sense too. Repeal's not a bad one to retain. It's going to be cheaper with Primal Amulet. I'm not going to block this because I don't want to ramp my opponent. The 2 damage is less relevant than them having more mana and board for the next turn. So it's not really worth blocking there. If you're not familiar with Viridian Emissary, it's a 2/1 for 2, and when it dies, OP can fetch a basic land and put it on the board. I go ahead and get Garrick out here, untap 2, and leave up my mana, and leave back a blocker to hold the Springleaf Druid at bay. They go with my Garrick, I believe. I do just trade here. With their 1/1, I don't want to trade for their 2/1 because, again, ramp is not good for me. I want them to be slower. I believe they go ahead and play on Eternal Taskmaster, which can get back creatures for 3 mana. Very good card, good value card. I go ahead and just loot the Quicken away. Play out the Primal Amulet here, play out my tapped land, make a beast to basically force them to attack at the Garrick and lose a creature on the board, because Garrick would be dead anyways if I untap there. They opt instead to actually push damage on me here, I believe. They get back their Druid. I go ahead and block the 2/1 because I think the mana ramp's going to be a little irrelevant at this point. I have pretty large mana advantage, and I have an additional mana reducer in the form of Jace's Sanctum on the next turn. So I am going to go ahead and untap both these, probably cast my Rampant Growth to get a charge counter on the Primal Amulet, and save 1 mana because Primal Amulet makes things cheaper. Honestly, in retrospect, what I should have done in this line of play is played the Jace's Sanctum first. Actually, no, it wouldn't have mattered. It wouldn't have mattered because it's reduced just to 1 green. So it wouldn't have mattered what order I played it. I played it fine. At this point, I could cast Turnabout, but I don't really have a payload in hand right now. They do go ahead and kill my Garrick, which is fine by me. Play out the Viridian Shaman. I go ahead and just cast Repeal right now. I believe on their Eternal Taskmaster to get deeper in my deck and also to kind of tempo them. Find a commit memory. They're going to blow up my Primal Amulet, but my cost reduction is still reduced by 1, and I've had a pretty decent board as far as mana goes. I'm going to go ahead and I believe leave up. Oh, I'm leaving up possibly Chemistry's Insight or just commit memory probably. I could have actually cast out the Champion of Wits, which I think may have actually been a better line there, to be honest. Radiant Flames bottom. I don't really care about killing their board right now, I don't think. But we'll see. I think I should have definitely cast Champion of Wits there. I may have just missed it. They go ahead and Geyser Granite, my 1 threat, my 3/3, which is a 0-drop. Yeah, I do bottom that. Alright, so I cast out Deep Analysis. I believe bottom that. Find a Telling Time. Find Thrill. Or I scry Thrill. Put Pull, and then I think I put Throw on top. Pardon. I get rid of the Magus the Candelabra. Magus the Candelabra is really only good if you have one of the mana doublers in play. So I'll go ahead and get rid of it here. And just get some more draw in. They cast on a Wall of Blossoms. I'm just kind of letting them expand into me right now. Like, my life's not under that much threat. Like, these value creatures are good, but they don't clock as hard as, like, the red creatures do. Go ahead and cast Nature's Lore. It's pretty much it's mana neutral. Cast out Circuitous Route. These are going to come into play tapped. There's a Mana Flare on top, which is nice. I want that card, so I cast my Growth Spiral to get the Mana Flare in my hand, because it's instant speed, so I draw it. Don't get to put a land in, but I get to draw that card because I want it really badly. Probably going to find 2 gates here, be my guess. Nope, I just find 2 basics, which is fine. At this point, I have so much mana, it doesn't really matter that much. And next turn, I'm going to be able to go off. I'm not dead to the board this turn. I'm going to be pretty low, but I'm not going to be dead to it. I think the only card that could actually kill me from there is, like, specifically Nissa. And I couldn't win last turn, so I figured I'd put myself in the best position to win this turn. They reanimate, get back their thing. Definitely buff up their mana. Put me down to, like, 2, I want to say. Go ahead and find another island. I just play it out because I'm pretty sure I'm going to just go through my whole deck here. I go ahead and cast Turnabout, put that on the bottom, that island, off the Geyser's Sanctum, untap all my lands, cast a big Pull from Tomorrow. I possibly could have gone bigger on this. This is kind of a value-based decision. I believe I just cast it for like 15 or something here. Nope, just 12, which is still a reasonable one. I think I bottomed that as well. Yep. All right, Harrow at this point again, because we have mana doubler as mana neutral. I get the Heartbeat out first. Harrow, which is way more than mana neutral. It's way mana positive. Get out 2 more islands. Play out this card to get another draw step, and also to get it out of my deck, because I plan on looping my deck at this point. I don't want that card in my deck anymore. I want to just draw gas. Forbidden Alchemy, put that to the bottom. Find our Chaomancer, which is going to be another Turnabout. So I'm just going to tap all my manas here, because I can't double my mana anymore. I have both my mana doublers in play. Or Chaomancer targeting Turnabout. Find Turnabout, cast Turnabout targeting myself. Untap my lands. Cast out Sylvan Library. Again, I just want to get these permanents on the board so they're not in my deck. If I have to loot my deck, it means there's less cards that don't do anything immediately in my deck. I do go ahead and use that to kill off one of their threats. Regrowth, I believe, target, again, the Turnabout. Get the Soul Lantern out, which is basically just a worse version of Scrabbling Claws, but it's alright. It's fine. Whisper the Muse, probably bottom it. Because at this point, I'm just looking for my Grape Shot or like something. I Eternalize this card to get deeper in the deck, get rid of some of the lands and the irrelevant cards, cast out the Prism, draw the Brain Geyser, play out the Scrabbling Claws. At this point, I'm going to set up an Animist Awakening because I have two doubling, basically double mana doublers in play. I'm getting 3 mana per land with Mana Flare. And Heartbeat, getting more lands is pretty good. I believe I cast this for my whole deck. Yes. So there are only lands in my graveyard in hand right now. There are none left in my deck at this point. I don't know if it ends up actually being worth it, but I think long-term it's worth it to do it here. The game may freeze at this point. Hopefully it doesn't. All right, it didn't. Whew. This is a lot of game actions. So, yes, there are a lot of lands in play. At this point, I'm going to cast Brain Geyser for my opponent's entire deck. So I have all my lands now. I could also cast it for my own deck and just Grape Shot them, but I want to kill them with Brain Geyser here. Which is just funny. And I believe I'm at an even 79 or 78 or something here. Like I have almost exactly enough. If I didn't, I would just draw my deck and find the Grape Shot and win. Or I could loot my whole deck with Midnight Clock. So yeah, this is going to be a lethal Brain Geyser. It's turn 10. It's a little slow. We did some board controlling early. It's not... When you fish the deck, it's going to obviously fish a lot faster than it plays out. It does have some control elements to it. It needs to because it's not fast enough as a combo deck. But yeah, this is basically a 78-point fireball for their deck. It's still going up. I'll let it play out. And you can see them, here we go. Voila. Draw your whole deck, sir. And boop. And that is game, guys. So let's jump to game 3 really quickly. We'll be right back. Alright, guys, we're back. Unfortunately, the third replay was broken. I guess it's fortunate that I checked it first. We didn't get like a quarter of the way or halfway through the game and missed it. But we're going to be jumping into the next deck. I'm going to showcase the Rock now. This is the deck that I was actually just playing against, or a similar version to it, a little slightly older version of it. This is my build of the Rock. This is a fine hand. It's a little slow, but it's got, a turn 2 Mana Dork, or a turn 2, I'm probably just going to play Deathcap Cultivator. No, I guess I don't. Just want to get this one down. I didn't draw the land, is why. It's actually a good reason I didn't do it. My OP looks like they're playing like a bug deck of some variety. Possibly a combo deck. Hard telling, but it looks like bug of some variety. Go ahead and get the Springleaf Druid down. Pretty good card. Ramps me up by 1 mana. OP plays out Mana Dork. I'm just going to try to develop my mana and get a little deeper in cards here. I want to find my land drop for the turn. Deathcap's not a bad one to play, but if I'm against like a rock control deck, I really don't want to have more ramp creatures in play. I'd rather have lands in play, I guess, against them, because my creatures are a little more expendable, a little more killable. At this point, I'm just kind of like playing the beatdown. Like, I feel like if I have a bunch of blue mana against me, like, what's the point in actually just playing out my good cards? I could play out this Arasta, but like I don't see a point. Like, I'm kind of winning on board. They have to do something about it. I want them to have to do something. If they're not going to tap their mana and use it for things, like, I'm just going to sit here and just hit them with these little weenies. And it's a fast enough clock that I don't think playing the Arasta out into a possible like Black Sun Zenith or Consume the Meek is really worth it. I guess Consume the Meek doesn't kill Arasta, but I think you know what I mean. Alright, so their Mastermind's Acquisition. They play out their Wilderness Reclamation. They're on a Wilderness Reclamation control deck, which is a pretty good bug control deck. Again, like I think I guessed correctly, they're on control, and like one of the ways you can lose to control, especially like in more grindy incremental formats like this, as opposed to like Highlander, is by overextending to a point that you will just get murdered by one card, like Black Sun Zenith. At this point, I don't think they have it. They have this card instead. Which at this point I'm kind of like, I didn't feel like they had the card they needed to actually get me there. And them bouncing Reverse Rebuke my cards is actually pretty good for me because they obviously don't have a draw spell. They would have used a draw spell with Wilderness Reclamation on their EOT. So my guess was they either had counter spells or something along these lines right here. And as you can see at this point, they're at 5 life, and like I really haven't had to expose more resources than I was willing to lose at any given point in time, and like these cards that are basically like mostly all 2-for-1s with the exception of the Mana Dorks are just doing their job of beating them down. I just play out Pelakka Worm here to force them to have a counter spell. They have one. I'm just gonna play out another thing and attack for 2 because I can't kill them this turn. They trade off. Now they're down to 0 cards. They're off the top of their deck. They have draws for sure that keep them alive, but it's very likely that if they draw a land or something like that, which is the most likely draw in their deck, that they're just dead. And here, as you can see, they're dead. And at this point, we still have a decent amount of gas in the hand too. If they blow up the board with like a Wrath, just play on a Drain Hermit, and they're dead again next turn, or even a Rasta, So, yep, that is game number 1 with the Rock against Bug or Sultai Control. Be back momentarily, guys, for game number 2. Alright, guys, we are back for game number 2 with the Rock versus Sultai. This hand's acceptable. Again, you're not always going to have Mana Dork draws. I had a Mana Dork the first game, even though I wasn't able to play it turn 1. Sometimes your mana is going to be awkward. That is one of the downsides of the format, is the mana is far less... Well, let's put it this way. You have to fix with capacity. Like, you don't have the dual lands, you don't have the fetch lands, so it's a little different that way. I'm just going to Winding Way here. I believe I say creatures. I'm going to have to discard here, which is not that big of a deal. I mean, I discard a land, literally, because I have Tasker, and I have another way to find lands next turn in the form of Sylvan Wayfinder. I can also just reanimate with Unearth this Phyrexian Rager and get 2 more lands, because I'm playing a 37-land deck. This Rock deck in Canadian Highlander can probably go down to 36 or 35 and be fine. It's still not a blue deck, so blue decks can generally go a little even less than that. But you definitely want your lands, because if you don't hit them early, you tend to just get way too behind, and you don't have as many ways of recovering. I get neutralized here on my Gonti, which is fine. They already have the Wilderness Rex, so their deck's kind of doing what it's intended to do. They've Laying Tendrils, my little idiots, which is fine. I mean, like, honestly, they already kind of drew cards or replaced themselves. I play out the Deep Forest Hermit to force them to have a counterspell again. They have an Exclude, which is a good one to have. But what I'm doing right now is just trying to get all the counters out of their hand so I can Conclave Naturalist this Wilderness Wreck. And I'm going to go for it this turn. I'm going to play a Tassiger out first because I actually rather have Tassiger get countered than the Conclave Naturalist. Ends up being a Memory Lapse. If they have another counterspell, they have another counterspell. They do not, so Wilderness Reclamation goes away, which means they're not going to have as many ways to really abuse the mana. They're not going to basically have a doubling cube every turn with their mana. So I'm going to be able to kind of just sit here and I play out the Triskelions. They have it again. And basically just keep on forcing them to have it. Like, have a decently high threat density in hand, and just keep going at them. Triskelion is essentially 4 until it's a 7. One turn it's a 7 power attacker, and the rest of the turn it's a 4 power attacker, so it just attacks for more damage than Tasker does. I don't play the Tasker on again. I want to force them to tap out for a board wipe on their turn before I do that. There we go. There's the Black Sun Zenith. I go ahead and blink them for a couple damage off the Triskelion. And if I draw a land, I can still just play out Pelakka Worm too, which I'm going to do because it kills them exactly on the next turn. It also will draw me a card if they can kill it, and the life gains whatever. It's fine. It doesn't really matter. If they win this game, they're going to win through, not really my life total. I mean, they may, but it won't really be about my life total. They shrink the Pelakka Worm down with their Obnixilus's Cruelty. I just go ahead and Elvish Visionary here. I just say go again. Like, again, I don't think I need to expose the Tasker, even though I can get a free card off of it. I'm going to get the worst card back in my graveyard, which none of them are horrible, but most of them are not as good as a 4 or 5 in this board state. They do find a kill spell for the Pelakka Worm, so I'm down again, but that's alright. I'll play out this Nissa and just hit them for 5. So, yeah. They have a mana leak, which means they can actually delay this by 1 more turn. So they've drawn pretty well to actually delay this, but again, like, you just put them in a position where, like, it's very difficult for them to win when you do this to them. Like, yeah, they finally drew a land, now they're dead. Just go ahead and get them. All right, guys, that's the Rock versus Control. Like, the Rock is, again, like I said kind of in the beginning, I think mid-range is the place to be in this format. I think it's probably the most consistent deck that is able to beat the aggressive decks very reliably. It can struggle against very, like the blue-white deck, I think, tends to beat this. And I think also that the Storm deck tends to beat this. And I think, the other deck I showed really fast, the Lich's Mastery combo, like the combo decks, combo control decks, tend to beat the Rock deck. But I think the Rock generally is one of the most well-rounded decks. It's my favorite that I build as far as, like, being a well-rounded deck. It can also get boring, though, because it has fairly standard playthroughs with it. But it is a very good deck. You can see here it's beaten up on this basically board control blue deck. But yeah, I think it feels like the Rock basically has the most matchup neutral results. I guess what I'm saying. Like, if you play it well, you'll tend to win with it. Anyways, quick pause, guys. Be back momentarily for some more gameplay with a different deck. Alright, guys, we're back. We'll be playing Red Deck Wins this time. We're playing against Gosman, who will also be on Red Deck Wins. This hand's acceptable. It's a little bit slow, but again, there's not as many one-drops in this format, so not having a play on turn 1 with Red Deck is fine. This deck's set up to be a little more incremental and grindy. I am going to have to play on a human on turn 2, which means this Stormkirk Noble is going to get through for some damage. I have to play my Keldon Marauders now, because I figure it's probably going to get through for some through for 5 damage, unless they want to blow it up, which I think is a pretty low EV play for them. I'll just go ahead and plank them here. Go ahead and Arc Lightning this. They have the Infuriate, which allows them to save their threat, which is pretty good, but I only put 1 damage on it. I opted to only put 1 on there because any of the pump spells they were going to have would pump the toughness of the Stormkirk Noble to 4, which would put it outside the range of the full volume of damage from Arc Trail. I'm sorry, I put 2 on it and then 1 on them. I have Heartfire here, which is kind of like the Fire Blast of the format. Before my Keldon Marauders dies to its vanishing, I just go ahead and use it as fodder for Heartfire. It's going to tie up my mana for the turn, but it allows me to play out this Frenzied Goblin, and I still feel like I'm in a pretty good spot. They're at a lower life total. They have a few more cards in hand, and we're at mana parity, but I have pretty good follow-ups to this play with Frenzied Goblin. I'm very glad to see the Chain Lightning get burned off on that card. I'm just going to go ahead and land my Tectonic Giant. They can dump mana into the Thopter to do a bunch of damage. And here they have the Slaying Fire, which is a 4 damage burn spell if you have Adamant. CGN Commander is unfortunately the card that gets exiled with it. It's, I think, the only one I could take. And I'm hoping to hit a land here. I do not, which is unfortunate. But I do hit Arc Trail, which allows me to wipe their board. Arc Trail, pretty good card, and Red Deck wins in Canadian Highlander regardless. And again, like, I'm kind of up on board. I'm a little down on life, though. The one thing that I'm relying on is my deck's ability to, just have more mid-range threats. I get in there with this card, play out these two, or that one right there. I don't want to play the Fire Drink Satyr out because it's kind of a risk in this situation. But it also keeps back their blockers. Or, I'm sorry, their attackers on the ground because they don't want to trade and turn on my Barbarian Ring. I do go ahead and pop the War Driver, pop the Pia and Kira Nalar with the Barbarian Ring after I get to 7. They char my face directly for 5. And now that they're out of cards, I play out my Fire Drink Satyr, which would have gotten charred if I had played it out earlier, which I think makes sense. They actually don't attack me here because they're at 6, and I have exactly lethal on board. So if they drew land, which we know they did, they were in some trouble there. Now I'm at 4, they're at 4. They have mana advantage, but they're not, they have to actually stay back here because if I draw any burn spell, actually if I draw any land or burn spell, they're dead because I have Firebolt. So the reason they stay back makes sense. If they don't, then, and I draw a land, I can Firebolt them plus attack them with the Abbot to kill them, and they can't kill me with a 3/3 right next to them at 4. As it turns out, I do draw a land, and I basically force them to block there. I want to just trade off and put them to 2. They play out this card right here, which is fine. It's not great in this matchup, and I draw Burst Lightning, and for lulz, I just shoot the Fire Drink Satyr for 4. And they go ahead and just tap their mana to pump up the Fire Drink Satyr to kill themselves because the game's over. Pretty close one. Pretty close game. It was actually pretty grindy and incremental. There was a couple twists and turns. The Pia and Kira Nalar. The Pia Nalar and the Pia and Kira Nalar were both fairly strong, but we managed to kind of draw out into some of the draws we needed to. And as you can see, like some of the more grindy cards like Firebolt, like Barbarian Ring, tended to be pretty relevant in this because they represented essentially card advantage. Where this represented basically card advantage is a mana source in the early to mid game and a long game burn spell, and then this basically is 2 spells stapled to 1 card spread out over multiple turns. Given they're less efficient, these cards tend to be very powerful in this format. So quick pause, guys. We'll be back for game 2 momentarily, and the Red Deck wins Mirror. All right, guys, we're back. This hand's very good for the red deck Windsmere. Like, I like this hand a lot. Like, I kind of assume that my deck's a little bigger than Gosman's is, especially if they're playing Fireslinger. And, like, I have Arc Trail and I have Ember Hauler in this hand, which are two very good cards. The Stigma Lasher's not great, but I know for a fact I'm playing more 3 and 4 drops than they are, and I assume that's Stagger Shock, so, like, I have some really good cards for this matchup right now. I just play out the Stigma Lasher because I figure it's going to prompt removal from them, or it'll trade favorably on board and I can get advantage later. They play on a threat. Great. I can 2-for-1 this threat. I'm probably just going to end up leaving them with the flyer and attack in. If they want to block, they can. They probably won't. It will be an even life total, and they'll be down 2 cards to my 1. I get Pillar of Flame. Seems fine. They play out Annex. Annex, again, very good in this matchup. I just play out this card and this card. I'm going to expose the Fire Drink Satyr to some burn spells here, which is fine. I figure they're probably just going to burn off the Countryside Crusher because it gets so big. There is Arc Slogger, which is a large lad. That's a big card. So Arc Slogger, if they don't block it, represents 14 damage next turn. Arc Slogger, if you're not familiar with the card, 4/5 for 5, obviously. Exile the top 10 cards of your library. Arc Slogger deals 2 damage to any target. When you're playing Hunter card, obviously Arc Slogger's value goes up significantly. They go ahead and blow this card up. They have 1 card left. I doubt it does 8 damage. They're going to take 4 down to 10, and then I'm going to tap and burn up my whole library and shoot them for basically 10. And that is game. That's Arc Slogger in action. Pretty good card. So like I said, I think the mid-rangey builds of Red Deck Wins are a little bit better at doing what they have to do in this format than like the really hyper-aggressive versions of the deck. And the issue for the hyper-aggressive versions is they just don't have the depth of burn in the 1 and 2 spot and the depth of the high-quality creatures in the 1 and 2 drop spot. So my assumption was that because you're lacking that, you just need to go a little bit bigger. To one, win the aggro matchups, and then 2, like, because you're not going to be that fast, like, have the tools to win the mid-range matchups. And then against control, like, just have cards they have to counter. And, like, honestly, against control, you're fine anyway. So you still have enough 1-drops and 2-drops. It doesn't really matter what the value of them are. As they attack for 2 or whatever, they're probably going to be good enough against control. That's really all you need to do is just put pressure on them and force them to react to you, and then just save up. Don't overextend, basically. Basically, don't allow them to get card advantage and just keep consistent pressure on them. So again, Red Deck Wins. It's a good deck in every format. It's really good in this format, too. You kind of get to see how the mirror match plays out here. And, yeah, it's still a quality deck, so if it's something that interests you, definitely play it. Quick pause, guys. We'll be back. We'll do one more game. I'm just going to do the matches for the decks that I kind of covered in the beginning, and then we'll probably call it there. Hey, guys, we're back. So this is going to be blue-white. So this will be the last one I'm covering. It's one of the decks I kind of went through a little bit more as far as, like, control builds that are viable in the format. I think there's quite a few. There's blue-black, blue-red even, Jeskai. I think you could go 3-color. But this is my blue-white build. So I'm on a level 5 in this game against Necropotence, but I think this hand's acceptable. It's got access to 3 lands via Eternal Dragon. It's got some early interaction with counter magic. I mean, Contradiction would be one of the cards we put at the bottom, more than likely, and then the other 3-mana counter spell. Just because I think we're going to have to keep pace, especially on the draw here. OP plays out Suntail Hawk, which should be a pretty fast beatdown. So we may be in some trouble here. We do have Fate of Retribution, but mana is going to be an issue, and with them being on the play and being able to play out 2 cards, we're under a little bit of a threat here, right? We're just going to leave up Mana Leak, and, if they don't do anything that relevant, we can just go use Eternal Dragon. But I am going to counter Student of War. That card gets out of hand really fast. It's probably better, most likely better than any 2-drop they're going to play, and my deck does not play a ton of pointer removal, despite having drawn it right there. I go ahead and gain 2 life and get a card deeper in my deck off Dovin's Acuity, and I'm going to look to probably set up, a Wrath at some point. If I can get there and still be alive, I'm trying to set up this Wrath. Alright, so I get Radical Idea, and I have Eternal Dragon in hand, which means I can use all 4 of my mana effectively, 1 finding land, and then 2 using Radical Idea just to cycle, and then have access to getting rid of bad cards in my hand later. So go ahead, Eternal Dragon first. Or actually, I didn't even Eternal Dragon. I saved the Radical Idea to gain more life, is what I did. That makes sense. Play out the Dovin's Acuity main phase to get some more life. Right now, what I'm looking to do is just build up my mana base. I kind of want them just to play their cards out. The life gain is going to allow me to survive more hits from them, and then I can eventually Fate of Retribution. I just go ahead and put this on one of their threats to make them think they have to develop more because I, again, have more time, and I get to Radical Idea here. They play out Mentor the Meek, which is a card I really don't want to be on the board right now because it's going to allow them to gain card advantage. So next turn, I'm probably going to look to Fate of Retribution. Well, my curiosity is if I do it main phase or not. I think there's a good argument to doing it main phase here. I actually saved the Radical Idea because, again, I want to get value up Dovin's Acuity. I have to go in their turn with it. They could play out threats main 1, but it's not likely that they will. So I go ahead and Fate of Retribution here, and then I have the Radical Idea on my next turn to flip Dovin's Acuity back to my hand. Get rid of the Quench because it's looking pretty bad at this point. I'm going to go ahead and get a Dovin's Acuity out and leave up Spell Snuff on the backswing. Gain 2, get the Desertion. And at this point, I'm looking pretty good. Like, I've swept their board. I'm at 11 life. They look to have flooded out pretty heavily. I get a Planar Outburst, so my hand's looking quite strong against any sort of creature shenanigans. Now I'm just looking for more card draw. And ideally, like, some variety of threat would be nice. They play on an Elite Vanguard. I'm going to allow that one to resolve. I could just warrant that back to the top of their deck. Go ahead and get the Eternal Dragon back to start building up my mana base, and also just to have a threat. Can leave up Desertion here, so it kind of makes sense to me. I just go ahead and warrant this back to the top of their deck. Can't be a card they really want to draw. I go ahead and cast or use Eternal Dragon again to get another land, and they go ahead and concede here because they're pretty dead. I have numerous counter spells in hand. I have a point removal spell in the form of Banishing Light. I have a card engine in the form of Eternal Dragon, and then I have Planar Outburst. So I'm in a pretty good spot here. We're going to quick pause, guys. We'll be back momentarily with the next game in this match. Hey guys, I'm back, and game number 2, you're going to check your opponents on White Weenie. This hand's a mull. This hand's a keeper. It's pretty slow, but it's got an Augur Bolus to block, which is kind of nice. Yep, they play on a Figure of Destiny, which is a card that can get very big. It's kind of scary. Dovin Bond can actually shut down its activated ability, though, if they tap too low, and they plan on doing it in their main phase during a tap step. But the Eidolon of Obstruction is actually randomly really annoying here, because it's not going to allow me to curve out into Dovin Bond after a turn 3 counter spell. They know I have Ochitai's command, so I'm going to hang back. Their ground team is basically only 2 power. Their ground team's blocked off. If they activate the Figure here, it's just going to become a 4/4. And I think I'm just going to take this turn. I think it's better to save the 2 over 2 more turns than it is to block out the 4 or chump block the 4 this turn. It's also unfortunate due to the fact that they're not playing cards at that point, right? So I am going to go ahead and just get this with Sinister Sabotage to get a mill. No point in taking the Flooded Plain. I don't need the Mystic Sanctuary, which that can fetch, because I don't have good spells in my bin yet. Gideon Jura is a pretty strong pull, but I can't activate it this turn, so I'm going to leave up Ochitai's command and try to gain some life and draw some cards if they don't do anything else. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm going to get back this card. I'm going to chump block the Figure of Destiny. That makes sense. I like that play. All right, there's Approach the Second Sons. I actually have to pass here, and this is a mistake on my part. I actually forgot that Exile doesn't get non-white creatures, or doesn't get white creatures, so I am, this is just a misplay. I could have played Gideon out there, but Gideon doesn't do anything on that board, because you can't activate Gideon through the Eidolon of Obstruction. It takes 1 more mana. I should have played Dovin Bond out there, and it wouldn't have done all that much, but I get a little lucky and draw a Planar Outburst anyways through my mistake. I was planning on exiling, did not work out. They play out 2 threats. Pretty good. Pretty good. I go ahead and get this card down and plus it up. It's unfortunately going to die to exact damage off of these 2 cards because they present 8 damage. I really need another Wrath effect here if I want to stay in this one. Yep, it dies. I get down Dovin Bond, gain some life, and go ahead and concede because I need another Wrath. I like the way they played this one a little better. They didn't extend as hyper-aggressively as they did in the first game. Their extension was a lot better. Their draw probably supported too. They only have 4 lands. Last time, they drew a lot of lands, but I do think they extended probably a little quickly. And they have a card engine this time, and if I don't sweep this card engine, I'm going to lose to it. It'll get me eventually. So guys, quick pause. We'll be back momentarily for game number 3 versus White Weenie. All right, guys, you're back. This hand's acceptable. It's a little bit hinky. I'm on the play, so I'm going to keep it because I have a Memory Lapse into a 3-mana counterspell, and I am playing 39 lands in this deck, so the chances of hitting mana is pretty high. I'm just going to go ahead and play my Plains out. I can Revitalize if they don't do anything relevant. They do something that's kind of relevant, so I just go ahead and Memory Lapse it here. I'll probably counter it with a Dissolve on the backswing, tie up their mana again, and also get a card deeper in my deck. And I'm finding lands like I want to. I kind of do want to find some more white sources at this point, though. Because I do have this Faded Retribution. I intend on it being an instrument by which I, control the pace of this game or blow up all their threats. Right now we're countering that just to keep them slowed down. I am going to tap out this turn for Court Hussar, though, just to probably find another white source or a threat if I can. I find Dovin Bond, which is better than finding another white source because it'll find me cards and give me life. They play out the Figure of Destiny. So they get in with their Flying Vigilance 1/1. I go ahead and get the Dovin Bond down. Oh, I don't this turn. Or why not? Well, maybe I was considering this card. I also know they're short on mana. They attack again with their 1/1. They're not really doing much either. I don't really need the life gain yet. I may have been waiting for another land drop. Possible. They go play out Knight of the Meadow Green. I'm pretty happy with this. They look to be a little bit mana shy right now, and they don't have great attacks into me. and they have okay attacks right now. Thematic Compass to find my next land drop. Again, find a plains. One more land, and I'm going to be up for Fate or Retribution. They get out the Asira Avenger. I'll just block one of these 2-power things. I believe the Dovin dies this turn, yep. But it drew me some cards and gave me some life, which is not bad. I'm going to get Dovin's Acuity out, get a little deeper in the deck. Dovin's Acuity really is an earner in this deck. Spire of Vraska is actually pretty powerful. It's going to be a Maze of Ith, which is really relevant in this format. It means after I sweep, I'm going to have a relevant way to control like the first threat they play, especially on reduced mana. I go ahead and Fate Retribution on my main phase, even though it's an instant, so I can get Dovin's Acuity back and gain some more life and get some more cards out of it. They play on Imposing Sovereign. I just go ahead and quench that because, I mean, while I can control it with Spires of Vraska, Quench is not going to stay relevant for long. It's a pretty bad counterspell, but it is nonetheless a 2-mana counterspell. Warrant Warden is actually also very good. I could make a creature here, but I actually opt instead just to wait on it. It's not really a great. I want to make the removal as dead as possible. White Weenie has less removal than they do in Canadian Highlander. You don't have Swords to Plowshares and Path to Exile, but generally speaking, they're going to have some. They're going to have more removal than I have creature-based threats. So I kind of want to just hold on to that and use the warrant half of it. Urza's Factory is a huge draw. They just go ahead and concede to it. They're too choked on mana, and Urza's Factory puts down enough threats that are on par with their threat level that they had enough. And frankly, they're probably dead here. I have Warrant Warden to deal with their second threat. I have two counter spells. I have Warrant Warden to deal with their next threat. I have Banishing Light, and I have a recursive source of threat / card advantage. I'm going to be making Assembly Workers every turn with my vast mana advantage that I have going on here. And I also have Dovin's Acuity, which, is not relevant at the very moment with the card pool that I have available in my hand, but is pretty relevant if I draw any random card like Revitalize or Telling Time or whatever to get it back and then get more cards out of it, gain more life out of it, etc. And we got Maze of Ith, etc., etc. So, anyways, I'm going to go ahead and cut it there, guys. I kind of wanted to showcase the format. This is a format that's really not very widely spread right now. There's literally there's not many active players, right? So I kind of want to drum up some more support for it. Like I said, I'm going to have the Discord linked down in the comments section, as well as the other resources that I showcased in the very beginning. I hope you kind of enjoy getting to see the gameplay. It is a little bit different than Canadian Highlander. It's more incremental, more grindy. It's more like playing like some of the best draft / sealed decks ever. But at the same time, it's very interesting to build in, right? And that's kind of the pull to me. That's a pull to me to 100-card formats in general, is that you have to consider a lot more of what you're doing. The decks don't build themselves, per se. And these decks certainly don't, because not a lot of folks have looked at them. So I'm not going to promise that all the decks that I briefly showcased are correct, they're right, because I don't think all the decks that can be played in this format have really been found yet. But as you can see, they're just glancing through the decks that I kind of covered, and then some other ones that I really briefly highlighted. There's a pretty wide array of things that you can do in the format, despite these decks being literally $1 to buy online, which is nuts to me. So if money is a constraint for you playing Canadian Highlander, this is not going to be an alternative per se for Canadian Highlander, because the power level is a lot lower, but in my opinion, it's still great Magic. As a person who loves Canadian Highlander, loves playing Vintage, loves playing Eternal formats, I love playing this too, mostly for the building aspects of it, and you really get to just re-explore cards. If you've been a long-time player, you get to kind of do that, and if you're a new player, a lot of cards that are in current sets are even legal. You see Tectonic Giant, which is a great card, and it's a penny because it doesn't see play anywhere. So anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed it. I hope at a minimum, it was interesting. This is certainly something different. It's not really a mainstream format. A lot of my formats are not mainstream, but this is one that is probably off stream even for the folks that I normally produce content for. But yeah, I hope at least if anything it sparked interest. At least check out the Discord, jump in there, and try building a deck and try playing it. If anything, it's a very low overhead cost. It's literally $1, $1.50 to play the format. So if you already have a Moto account, you could probably get these cards for very cheap and jump into a game. And yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed it, and take care now.